Okay, so now we can hand it over to our final module of the day, which is a panel on an overlooked part of research of this nature, which is match funding and stakeholder relationships that can involve grant funding or in-kind contributions. And it's a complicated system, and it's growing more and more important. So I've brought in 3 CTED PIs who have been particularly successful at these relationships. And I wanted to hand things over to Dr. Chris Mccahill at the University of Wisconsin, who will lead the panel on this pretty interesting topic. So hello, everyone, and I'll step off here.
Thanks, James. Let me I can bring up a title slide and see if I can get screen sharing working, which I think I can. There we go. So as James mentioned, I'm Chris Mccahill with the State Smart Transportation Initiative at the University of Wisconsin. And with me is Phil Winters at the University of South Florida, and Carolyn McAndrews, who's here in Madison with me. Yeah, and we're gonna each talk about some of our, I guess, our unique experiences navigating a wide range of funding sources, working with a wide range of partners in a bunch of ways. So I'm just gonna start things off by giving a little background on my organization and how we approach funding and projects and partnerships. So my group is the State Smart Transportation Initiative. We are a network of reform-oriented state DOTs operated by the University of Wisconsin and Smart Growth America. So we were founded at the University of Wisconsin around 2010 and originally set up with funds from the Rockefeller Foundation and Federal Highway Administration. That funding has evolved over the years. I joined in 2013. And then an important part of our story is that around 3 or 4 years ago, we formalized this partnership with Smart Growth America. So Smart Growth America is a nonprofit advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. And we both realized that we were doing a lot of similar or parallel work. And so we set about sort of formalizing an arrangement between us, just basically through a memorandum of understanding that is an indefinite agreement to work together. So while we are still based at the University of Wisconsin, if you go to Smart Growth America's webpage, you'll see that we're one of their programs, just like the National Complete Streets Coalition or Transportation for America or any other of their programs you might know. And that's been a really unique way to share resources and projects and staff, and really let us be more flexible in the way we approach projects. So basically, we function in 3 ways. 1 as a community of practice, 2 through technical assistance, and 3 through general knowledge sharing. And I figured a good thing to do would just sort of be to walk through each of these points with some specific examples and sort of tie each of these to how their implications for our partnerships and funding. So the first program of ours is this community of practice. And this is pretty much what you see here. This is, we bring together the heads of state DOTs once a year for about a day and a half to just come together in a room together and talk through what issues people are trying to tackle, what opportunities they have, and just sort of give folks a space to talk through these things. We set a pretty light agenda. There are sometimes some small presentations just to get people thinking, but it's mainly a talking space. This is obviously, and this is funded mainly through foundation grants that we've gotten over the years. It's not a heavy lift, but it's not real easy to fund. So that's something to think about. So there's a cost benefit to running something like this. We know other groups that run similar sort of peer network opportunities, and sometimes folks will lean more on membership fees or sponsorship. For now, we've been able to run it through grants. Obviously, it creates a good space for the folks who attend to talk to each other and learn, which is a benefit that we offer them. And it's also a great space for us to learn what folks want to, what they want to do, what's at their top of mind, and think about how we can help them through our research and technical assistance. So the second area is technical assistance, and this is the bulk of how we spend our time. Probably many of you think of this just as research. We call it technical assistance because that's our main motivation for doing the work. There isn't always a research question, there isn't always a published paper, but we're always trying to advance the practice. So an example here is the Virginia Department of Transportation has this program called Smart Scale. Virginia DOT has been one of our close partners for a while now. And their Smart Scale program is basically this data-driven project prioritization process that they go through every couple of years. So they actually pick how they're going to invest their money by scoring a bunch of projects. One of the ways they do that is by measuring accessibility impacts. So this is, how does a project affect access to jobs, and how is it related to access, like walking access to stores and restaurants and parks and things like that. So if you're familiar with this, this sort of work at all, you know there's a ton of research on this kind of stuff, and very little of it being put to use in practice. So largely what we're doing is forming this bridge between research and practice, because there is a pretty big gap. So we're aiming to fill that gap. So we bring a lot of that knowledge to help Virginia DOT build their program. We've helped them develop some methods, and we even have helped them actually do some of the scoring of project scoring, so some of the brunt work. And this is all sort of through a consulting arrangement. So we're typically not often the lead consultant on a project like this. We work with local consultants, larger firms, and act as a sub to them. And that's a pretty common arrangement that we use. And then research does flow from this work. So you can see here a couple papers that we've published that have flowed from the work. They're related to the work. But often the publication process comes much later, after the work has already been done. And like I said, there's not always a research question in the technical assistance. So we don't necessarily have that strong of a motivation to publish like a lot of folks do. Another good thing about doing this work, though, is that we do see unique research opportunities, you know, by working sort of hands-on through these issues with folks, with agencies that are in the weeds. We know exactly what questions they're asking and what questions they need answered. So this lets us frame some research proposals and some research work from that, and get more research-oriented funding. And another good thing about this is when we are trying to pitch a research proposal, we have a strong network of agencies that we can lean on for letters of support, for in-kind match contribution sort of things. So that could be that they're willing to put in some staff time on the research project, share data, even offer monetary match sometimes. There's always bureaucratic challenges, but depending on the type of research we're trying to pursue, we can be pretty confident that we're connected to someone somewhere who is interested in supporting that work and playing a role. I also mentioned that this is consulting work a lot of the times. So this also gives us the advantage of building some good relationships with consultants that are doing a lot of similar work. So the firm we worked with in Virginia was Michael Baker International. We've formed a pretty good relationship with them, done follow-up projects, not just in Virginia, but other places. And that's been really beneficial, filling that sub role as sort of like a thought leader, university-based thought leader and technical experts. Being able to work with firms offers a bunch of advantages, especially given that a lot of them have more capacity than smaller research centers do. So I don't know if anybody's ever tried to get an NCHRP proposal or anything like that. I think we've learned that it's a pretty heavy lift for us to try and do something like that. We don't have the name recognition necessarily, but there are a lot of firms that do, can turn out proposals much easier than we can, and we love to work with them. So it's been a good role for us to fill. Last thing I want to say about our technical assistance is that it's not always consulting work. We do a lot of grant-funded technical assistance too. So we've worked with all kinds of foundations over the years, Transit Center, McKnight Foundation, Barr Foundation, JPB Foundation, to fund technical assistance for cities and agencies and states. And anyone who knows that nonprofit funding world at all knows that these folks are really interested in work that has an immediate on the ground impact, which is something that can be really hard to do through research. So our ability to demonstrate that folks are really interested in the work that we would do and would put it to use right away has been really beneficial for us in sort of pursuing some of those opportunities. And finally, to the knowledge sharing portion, this is just sort of a general service we provide through our blog. We host webinars, we put out reports and other documents. And this serves a few useful, a few good uses for us too. So you can see an example of our blog here. This is some recent posts of ours. One, we highlight our own research and projects. We also highlight relevant items in the news, and we sort of distill current research that we think our audience would find helpful. So we fill that role for a lot of folks, and that's really beneficial for us because it forces our staff to stay on top of what's in the news, stay on top of what's being published, sort of go through that on a bi-weekly basis, and then actually write about things. So it forces us to have our finger on the pulse of what are hot topics, what are people talking about, and force us outside of our little niche areas more. So we do feel like we have our finger on the pulse of a lot of things that are going on. And then on the right here, you can see a report we put out recently called Measuring Accessibility. And as I mentioned before, there's a bunch going on in academia around accessibility and much less going on in practice. So this was an effort funded by the New Urban Mobility Alliance to bridge that gap, like I say. So basically translate a lot of the knowledge from research into a guide for practice. And that's not just the theoretical aspects, but also what tools are available, what data are available, what buttons to push once you get one of these tools, and what to do with the outputs in terms of programmatic things like picking projects and long-range planning and things like that. So that sort of living in that space between knowledge and practice has sort of given us the insight to produce things like this. Folks find this kind of thing really useful, and then for us, it leads to other technical assistance opportunities and things like that down the road. So that's an overview of our program. Probably a lot to take in. I'm sure we'll be happy to answer some questions about anything I shared here. But I think I'm going to hand things off to Phil if you're there and ready to go.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That was really good. It's learned a lot. So scribbling down some notes here about what I should do. Okay, let me try my share screen. See if I can. Okay. All right. I think you should be seeing the slides, right?
Not yet.
No.
Take your time. It will work out.
Okay. Let's try that again. Oh, I see. God, all these things are so different. Never clicking the right button.
Multiple screens are a curse and a blessing.
Yeah. So it's still not popping up, right?
Oh, we see.
Yeah, we've got it.
If you
Yep.
click presenter mode,
I got you.
I think we'll all
Okay.
get there.
I'm so used to seeing the red border. All
Or
right.
slideshow, right? That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're
Yep.
all set.
There we go. All right. Thank you. But I was actually going to focus a little, my introductory talk about the non-federal match, about to make a lot of these types of projects go, they either require at least full support from a traditional source or a patching together of resources of matching of various And James told us we were pretty good at it. So I said, well, that's good to know. I didn't know that. But let me tell you a little bit about the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida. We were started in 1988. Though we are part of the College of Engineering, we consist of 28 full-time, non-tenure earning research faculty. So we do cooperate with the tenured faculty and work together on several types of different projects. We certainly lean on a lot of the students that not just the College of Engineering provides, but our urban planning program, our geography folks, our who have worked with advertising students. So we depend on a lot of the different students to work together. And we have approximately 22 staff to handle the paperwork and keep us straight and narrow, if you will. We currently log about $20 million worth of research and expenditures through our basically research, education, training, and technical assistance projects of a variety of sources. Of that 20 million, I would say probably less than $1 million actually comes in the form of support, direct support from the university. We do get certainly some return through the indirect return back to the departments. But for the most part, most of that has to come through research or contracts and grants. So it's often feels like searching for Waldo, looking for funding sources and looking closely and see if anybody can find Waldo while I'm talking here. But it tends to be very difficult to patch together resources and sometimes making the match, if you will, of the project to the right sponsor. Yeah. So these are the variety of different sources. Now, cash match would be nice. I don't think we get that very often. At least I haven't been, so I'm going to skip over that. One of our big sources of actually using match and using the CTED project as an example, we have 4 CTED projects that are being matched by 3 Florida DOT projects. One project is actually supporting 2 of the CTED projects that we're doing. And that's generally where we need to go to Florida DOT and say, we've got this project we're able to perhaps secure through CTED. Would you be interested in allowing us to use your project as match? In some cases, the match is closely related to that particular project and the DOT person sees a direct benefit. In others, it may be quasi-related, but don't object to having their funds leveraged because I think they look at it as just giving more research, bringing research knowledge coming back to them via CTED. So they're quite favorable. Another popular source is foregone indirect. I know we use that over one of the small projects that we have with CTED this year, where, in other words, instead of the 49.5% federal indirect rate that we use, we might charge a lower rate, a city county rate, or even a Florida DOT rate, which is 10%. And that way we can claim the unrecovered indirect as match and use that. The university is not always keen about waiving indirect, but occasionally they will do so, and they have done so certainly on the CTED project. Though we didn't do anything this year tied to CTED related to program generated income, that requires prior approval from the federal DOT to be able to use it, and it usually has to be related to the project. We have used it, for example, to support a program we call the Best Workplaces for Commuters, which is the background you see behind me, which is in a program designed to encourage employers of all sizes and all types to offer commute-friendly benefits to their employees. It's a membership-based program for non-Florida entities. So we'll have companies like Google, Tesla, Stanford Research Park, Yale New Haven Hospital, all these types of different employers from around the country belong to that, and their dues, if there will, are program generated income. And that means we spend it back on that particular project too. But that was a nice way. And that can also be used as match. Clearly in kind can be done if somebody is donating time and space, time and or space can be claimed as indirect. We've a popular one that I think most people are familiar with, the waiver of tuition. Again, all the Cutter researchers, not all the USF faculty, of course, but not all the Cutter researchers have the ability to waive their time. They're 100% billable, much like I imagine Chris's group is too. And so that requires being somewhat creative and going back to the college, especially if it's a college engineering student, to try to get a waiver of tuition that we don't normally have access to. And again, we don't have access, but others have used is faculty support. Now, just to kind of give you a sense of what it's doing for the CTED this year, we have about $169,000 coming in from CTED on a variety of projects. If I count them right, there are 9 different projects associated with this. And this will give you an idea that we have 4 of the projects, or 58% of the funding that we need is coming from the form of match from Florida DOT in terms of a project-to-project type match. A tuition waiver, we only had 1 project with that, the faculty research and support and salary. We had among the CTED projects, which have our traditional faculty, we're supported for 3 projects supported with that. 1 is unrecovered indirect. And then again, I just put program generated income. It's not being used this year, but could be used in subsequent years. So with that, let me turn it over to Carrie. Let me stop sharing.
I have found both of your presentations to be, very engaging and interesting, and I can't wait to get to the Q&A part to think about this together.
Okay. Thank you.
Let me navigate. Okay. Well, actually, I don't really need to do that yet. What I wanted to do first, before I open my slide even, is to introduce myself. My name is Carolyn McAndrews, and I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I'm a faculty member. I'm an associate professor in a department of planning and landscape architecture. And in this way, my own engagement with raising match funding and supporting these community partnerships around CTED projects is going to be different from Cutter or from SSTI. My own research is in really transportation planning and policy and design. I think a lot about things like land use and safety and public health, things that I'm sure you're all sort of, would be willing to bundle together. I'm a faculty member with very, I would say, traditional incentives. I work within sort of the institutional structure that would be familiar to most people. And my own sort of research interests within all of that do tend toward questions, not just of policy, but policy implementation. Like I really, when I read the book, about street level bureaucrats, like I really took it to heart. Like I really wanted to know, what kind of discretion, what sort of agency does somebody have who works, if you're working in the public works department, you make a difference in our transportation system. And the other thing that I tend to in my work, in my, sort of traditional research is, in addition to this interest in, planning theory or social theory, I really care a lot about practice and how, what are the working models of the world that people are using and deploying. And so those are the types of things that I think are really fun to engage with. So when I talk about the work that I've been doing that involve community partners in the context of CTED, part of this is, really a function of interest. So let me share two examples of some work that I have found pretty exciting, and I've been really fortunate to be doing. So the first example, I call this to plug into an existing network. So when I reflected on what was going on, I was like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't develop any of these teams really entirely on my own or any of these projects. So the first one involves the CTED team basically added capacity to sort of an existing initiative that was focused on equity. And it was an equity-focused Complete Streets initiative in Milwaukee. And this was a case where we, as a team of CTED-funded researchers, got to partner with these groups to provide a kind of a specialized component of their overall program. So in these figures, it highlights the Milwaukee Safe and Healthy Streets program, which was, kind of a team of advocates, local government, researchers that were funded by grants, by public health grants. And they sort of supported Milwaukee as the city adopted its Complete Streets policy. Well, then, because of some social and sort of, some professional connections there, working with Bob Schneider, who's a PI on these projects, well, we get to, noodling around these questions about complete streets and gender and equity. And we said, well, why don't we apply for some seed funding that I could access through UW-Madison to see what would happen if we start to look at complete streets implementation with an interest in gender equity. Because Milwaukee was able to, really had an interest in, racial justice and social equity, and an interest in gender equity, but nobody on the team really had the capacity to do that because their plates were full. So here we are. The role of this partnership was sort of to add, like we form a well, like a functioning team that can kind of plug in. And so that's what we did. And so that seed funding then became the match for a larger sort of cross-institution team funded by CTED that includes USF and Georgia Tech, as well as our partners at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which are not actually part of the consortium, but we were able to bring in as sort of partners or consultants on this, because it really is the fact that they have been committed to these partnerships that we can sort of hit the ground running. So this is one example, I would say, of, a researcher can plug into an existing network to provide some specialized knowledge or capacity. And you work as a team player and you can get along and you plug in. And the second example is a little different. This was one where we didn't plug in to an existing network. We had to form our network of partners, but we had a framework that we could use to support this. And what I'm talking about is a campus-wide challenge called Dream Up Wisconsin. It was funded by Schmidt Futures, which is a foundation or a philanthropic organization. And it was run out of our Institute for Research on Poverty. And they wanted, the theory behind this is, if you get a university, public partners, private partners, and nonprofit sector people together, we can actually make progress toward like solving social problems using technology and ideas. And the charge was to increase the income of Dane County residents. That's where we are. Madison is in Dane County. Increase their income by 10%, not their income, their net income by 10% in 2 years. And we thought, okay, well, transportation and especially maybe workforce transportation could be a part of this. And so we piggybacked on this challenge, and these images show that they had 55 submissions, they had 160 community organizations, lots of partners. They covered a lot of different themes that weren't transportation related solely, but are, targets. So our team focused on integrating taxi and van pool capacity in our region. This is my partner, Bill Carter, with Union Cab. Union Cab has like 200 employees and 60 vehicles. They're essentially a small transit system. And UW Transit has a really successful van pool system. So we looked at this and we said, wow, this is like the future of transportation. How can we take this existing capacity and sort of re-network people and help configure the operating procedures to do service integration, but maybe build in some institutions that would support regional, regional transportation that isn't traditional transit. And this network included then, transit service providers, as well as local government, regional government, nonprofit, and the university. And it was very much of a do project. When I write this as a research article, it has to be called participant observation with some amount of evaluation. It is challenging to do, to stick to secondary analysis. So a lot of these fieldwork projects are extremely uncertain. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of challenge, but there's nothing that gets you closer to sort of where the intellectual problem is real and the practical problem is also real. Let's see, what else did I want to say about that one? Well, anyway, I suppose I could say that we did make it to the semifinals, but we did not advance. So we were proud of what we did, and there's still more work to do. And this group continues to, we check out other RFPs, we continue to check in and meet with each other. And so we feel that having established this capacity, it does allow us to do things together as a group. Okay, so I've covered my slides and I have a couple of additional notes. I hope I'm on time.
Yeah, I think we are doing great. Yeah.
Okay. I did want to mention, we had talked in our pre-meeting, I should say, about junior faculty, right? Like, what does it mean if you're a traditional sort of tenure track faculty member? What is this? Well, I think my experience tells me, like, lesson I would draw from this is that it is a very good thing to draw on existing partnerships and to plug in, especially where the logic of that partnership works with your own research program. One can build on relevant service or teaching initiatives. By relevant, I mean relevant to your institution in a way that, it will count a little bit as research, but it will also count as service, and it will count as teaching, perhaps, if you can integrate it into teaching or mentoring. And in that way, the additional effort of organizing, holding a team together, providing some leadership, it will fit into a kind of an integrated package that describes one scholarship that is meaningful and relevant, but doesn't discount research at all. It complements it. The relationship building and the role of leadership is pretty significant. It definitely involves scheduling people and sending the calendar invites. I tell you that basically my role is to be the person who sends the calendar invites and make sure we continue. But behind that is to be a person who helps draw out the vision of the group, right? To look for a vision, to keep the mood and the morale of the group positive, and to feel like everybody's making progress towards something, and to be conscientious of operations and to sort of get things done. So as a PI, I would say that in the community engaged work, those are some of the additional functions beyond writing, data collection analysis that are on my plate every day. But they're very satisfying, and I feel that those are reasonable things to ask of scholars, and that maybe the research that that style of scholarship generates can be practical and useful in the long run, God willing. Yeah, so those are some musings on what it's been like. So thank you for that. I'm done.
Thank you.
Go to questions.
Those were both super informative and interesting, and all different enough that I think we threw a lot out there. I think just in terms of what we want to do now is definitely encourage folks to ask questions. We are hoping to sort of move in a bit of a discussion direction and be able to address what folks are thinking about. So I think there's a couple ways to do that in terms of using the Q&A, or that is probably your main opportunity to chat, but also I think if you want to raise your hand, there might be a way for us to elevate you to be able to speak. And I'll just assume that's the case unless James wants to jump in and correct me. So in the meantime, I've got questions for each of you. So I'll just start there. Maybe with Carrie. I was thinking about, like sort of as academics, I think we're sort of, a lot of us have chosen a niche. We've sort of been conditioned to choose a niche where we are experts in a particular thing. And then we start chasing funding opportunities like Dream Up, I think is a great example where we saw that opportunity. And our group is also very interested in very practical policy applications. And the closer we looked at that, we felt like, it was really interested in gizmos and stuff that we didn't really feel like was, really a great fit for us. And I think you found a way to follow it follow that path as best as you could. Can you speak a little bit to how you feel pulled by the funding from time to time and how you wrestle with that?
It's the advice that people give is like, don't chase funding, like form your team, anchor yourself in your like core business, right? And then go find funding for what matters. But this was not that, right? This was absolutely driven by the hype of Dream Up. And we were honestly excited by it. We felt like we wanted to win. And so we felt competitive. But intellectually, because I am not a center responsible for keeping people fully employed, I categorize that as a project that would allow me to learn a sector or expand my working knowledge of transportation to include things like employment transportation disadvantage, spatial mismatch, and like to adopt a field that I didn't have a lot of familiarity with, while at the same time being rooted in something that I am familiar with, which is organizational change. How are organizations going to change to address this fundamental problem? And the technology we came up with was not winning technology, but we think it's totally awesome. We want organizational change. We want institutional structures. We want regional planning. We want technology, information. We want information technology that allows these operators to communicate with employers, to communicate with riders, to communicate with each other. So there was a risk that it would totally fail. And I had to use that organizational technique, which is to protect that and say, it can fail within that bubble and it's not going to take me down, or it's not going to take the center down. So what would you call that? Would you call that 5% of your activity that could be devoted to high risk, high reward, exploratory, relationship building?
Yeah, I mean, everything is like a cost benefit analysis. So in that case, it was, I don't remember what the numbers were, but you're throwing yourself into this pot and hoping you make it to the end to win the prize. And the second, it feels like, you're not really what they're looking for, then probably you should be spending your time on other things, right? And that's the calculation that we made there.
Well, I should say though, we also used that same initiative to apply for workforce development funding from the state, which we got, and that funded a whole year of operations where we gave thousands of rides to people. And it also was the foundation and some of the match for the CTED work, which was the research part of that. So it was a case where we, once we had the idea, we did go off in search of, we've used it for NSF applications, which we didn't get.
Well, a lot of projects a lot of projects you get are stepping stones, right?
Yeah, that's it.
To different new opportunities. It's rare, I think, on a lot of our projects that it's you get to the last stone and then you don't go anywhere. You give up and go back. We find it's it'll take you down different paths that you hadn't anticipated, and generally gives you opportunities you may not have happened before.
Yeah, and it comes back to, Carrie, you mentioned not chasing the funding, because I mean, it is good that things grew out of that opportunity. But if you had put yourself in a position where you were bending yourself in a pretzel to chase this funding, then trying to grow something else out of it would have been impossible, because, or not worth your time, because it would have taken you too far from where you wanted to be.
Collaboration is costly. Collaboration is really important, but collaboration costs a lot. And that's why it's interesting to see it so much in policy. I wanted to ask you both, though, on these questions about things around technical assistance and relationships and teams, but specifically the role of research in transportation practice. What you think is sort of a highlight of transportation research? Like, what's the quality of transportation research that allows it to be both novel and applied at the same time? Like, but also, if practice doesn't really look to research, there's studies that show that practice looks toward cases and relationships more than it looks toward peer-reviewed literature or other types of things. What do you advise? What does your experience tell us about what we should be doing?
Don't call it research. I mean, it is kind of one of these things when we've had this talking to clients basically about what are your research needs, and it's like a blank. We don't have it. We have these problems. If they start describing what the problem is they want to have solved, where research can have hopefully an impact on it, you're fine. But yeah, they don't respond well to research. And I think it's, the impression that they may have, and that it gets done, it may get done on time, it may generate up a TRB paper, and they don't want to pay for people going to TRB, so it's like, I know our center, and maybe Chris, you have the same issue of, you have what the university is expecting from the center, for the academic and contributions and the helping with students, but then you have the paying clients who have different motivations and different goals and measures, and it's sometimes hard to reconcile those. The issue of, the rights to publish, I've had lost contracts over that clause simply because the client wouldn't give up that ability, just basically to squash whatever somebody wanted to publish. So.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the not calling it research, but I think that's probably right. And there's a big need for, I guess, research about research, or something in there, because if an agency has a question, what's the best way to do this, or what do we know about that? The answer is probably out there somewhere in many papers that have been published, and they don't have the capacity, knowledge, or access to those to that's a dissertation to understand the topic. But there is this space to be filled for experts to translate, the current best practices and current understanding that is in the research. And then also just, make the extra effort to put that information into unconventional places, write op-eds, write for some freely accessible magazine or quasi-journal that gives people an entry point to your work without having to dig through that other stuff.
Yeah, we actually, one of the things we do to try to support this is we operate several listservs, industry listservs. The oldest one I started in 1998. We have 2,000 transportation demand management professionals that belong to it, and it's the type of thing where people quickly go, I've got this problem, I'm looking for this example, and they post it, and then they'll get a half a dozen replies almost instantly. And it's enough to, stimulate their interest. And I use it as a way to see what's going on in the field as something that may never be published, right? Or talked about, or be talked about at a conference I won't be able to be at. So that has really kind of helped keep some sort of dialogue going, if you will. And then we use it as a way of certainly distributing our research and our tech transfer type activities like webinar announcements, et cetera, too, to bring it to the audience that won't sit down and go through a TRR.
So I've got a question for you, Phil. Your center is quite a bit larger than ours. Just in terms of this question of matching funds and sort of the puzzle that you find yourself trying to put together a lot, I think when we do build matches into our proposals, it's pretty straightforward, and because we have a lot of grant money and stuff or very specific pockets of money, we don't find ourselves getting into those puzzles too often. But there's a lot of opportunity if you have the capacity to do that. So, I mean, is this like someone's full-time job, or is this stuff that you just find yourself having to do to figure out, keep track of everything and put these pieces of the puzzle together?
Well, I guess we have to do it ourselves. We're organized in several teams. Like my team, I've got, like, I should know the number, 7 people. So our team works together and they have different research emphasis areas. So I look at my job as trying to say, okay, what can we do? What's the next step we'll produce this research project? Like one of my couple of my colleagues did a study on how the discussion of bicycle and pedestrian, I think it was just bicycle fatalities, how they were described in the newspaper and how they were framed, with a sense of who's being blamed, if you will. It's like, and that actually caught the eye of the National Safety Council, and it generated interest there, and then generated some additional interest to do some training, and then generated some interest that we proposed to put it in a learning management system, which is what we're trying to do now. And that, again, is a way to kind of expand it. So we're always looking to leapfrog, if you will, to the next kind of extension of the product. Some cases there's no more stepping stones to step on, but we always keep our eye out on it. But there's not one specific person at Cutter that's looking for that. We lean on each other a little bit, but.
Any other questions that either of you have for each other? I think if we don't have questions coming in from folks that are listening in, we don't have to draw out the conversation too much, but I don't want to miss an, there we go.
I was just about to ask if James wants to weigh in.
Yeah, I think this has all been really interesting, insightful stuff. And it's something that's not really taught in, a lot of what we do is not taught in graduate school, but this understanding the different levels of funding, the different types of funding, like state DOTs, where a lot of people get their money, they have different types of funds. Like Phil mentioned, they're partnering with the FDOT to sort of take existing match, but then split it into different projects. And there's such a thing as pooled fund studies, which people may not know what that is. But I wonder if you could describe, for example, could you define a pooled fund study for the audience? Phil or Chris, maybe.
I think we've both. I have given it less thought so far. I just became the director here about a month ago, so I've just been starting to get my feet wet in more and more of these things. We happen to know folks at the University of Minnesota who are doing a lot of the best work on accessibility analysis now. They put out a quasi-annual report, and that's funded from a pool fund study, which is basically enough state DOTs are interested in it that they all contribute to this pot of money. And that's been really successful at keeping that project going. So yeah, so I think that's a great opportunity that we're constantly thinking about, and it's hard to pull that together, and you need someone to lead it too from an agency. So Phil, I don't know what your experience has been.
We've not pursued them, but we have looked at them. In fact, I looked there the other day just to see what was in the pipeline, and I saw that I think it was Texas DOT and another state DOT had pledged like $40,000 a year for 3 years each towards a project that I think they were looking at more. They're halfway at their goal, I guess. They're looking for, I think it was dealt with motorcycle safety. So it kind of is an interesting way of identifying something where they may not want to, the state DOT, my sense is, may not want to completely fund that study, but sees value in that and are willing to, basically pony up some portion of it. And there's usually a suggested value, I guess, to contribute, but they're not, they're in the, seems to me, on the $25,000 to $50,000 donations per year to do it. So it's a nice way to leverage money, and I guess the feds can actually be the sponsor, or one of the state DOTs can be the lead sponsor. But it's another source. I think that's the point being is that, James, you're making, you're always looking for potential opportunities. I know that one of our research projects years ago from our previous UTC at Qatar identified a travel assistance device to help the cognitively disabled use transit. And that eventually led to one, licensing the idea to a commercial entity. Unfortunately, the economy went in the opposite direction, so it didn't succeed, but also led to a transit idea funded project through the Transit Cooperative Research Program, which is ideas to try to take some of these things and prop them up and do a little bit more, perhaps user-based, stakeholder valued research so they can take it to the next step. So we did get some funding at that, and that could have led, though it didn't, because I think we licensed it at the time, but that could have led to SBIR type funding, which the whole idea was to try to commercialize. We also then took the TAD, the travel assistance device, and one of the things we did learn is through a process called ICOR, sponsored through the National Science Foundation. We participated in that. And a big portion of their effort is focused on customer discovery, which they had the team of a grad student, faculty member, and a mentor, business mentor. The three of them actually interview. The goal was to interview 100 people face-to-face, stakeholders. So if you're trying to identify research needs, you talk to 100 MPO directors or 100 state DOT traffic ops folks, you're likely to get narrowed down something that might be appealing to all of them. And I guess the disadvantage for us at the time was we kind of came to the table, we thought we came to the table with a finished product or nearly finished product, to basically learn that didn't fit their needs completely, even though it would save them money. It didn't save them enough money, I guess, with helping the cognitively disabled. So
yeah, and I hope it's heartening for our students and junior faculty that even people like I deal with these issues as my job, and so do Chris and Phil to a certain extent, and Carrie, even as a tenured faculty member, this is a bigger part of her job than it probably was 5 years ago, of having to try to understand where money comes from and what different stakeholder relationships there are. And maybe it's heartening to see that even people who do this for a living don't have all the answers, and that it's still vastly understudied. Most universities, they have pre-award and post-award divisions in grants and contracts, but they don't have dedicated people whose job it is to go out and find you money. You're expected to go out and find that yourself, or just happen to get lucky and read the right magazines or something. I wish more universities would, commit resources. I think that it would pay for itself to pay somebody to find these things. But like, you may know somebody who has an NSF relationship. I didn't know that until I came to work here, that if you're a faculty member in any field and you have experience, even just using the NSF website to submit a proposal, that's an invaluable resource, and you'll have people bothering you all the time for help just uploading documents and looking for grants. It's like a full-time job, and it's okay to not know everything. It's okay to be mystified by this, but I think we've seen a lot of really creative funding in the last few years from our applicants. The three people you see here have found interesting ways to work with the community to bring in money or data. And that makes for stronger proposals. It makes for better research. It's not mandatory, but we like to see it when we see it, but we also realize we have a lot of work to do to help train people how to find this information, because it's not always easy to get.
I think
But
a lot of,
go ahead.
sorry, James. I was just going to say, I think a lot of it is building relationships. It's like engaging with, professional societies like the Institute of Transportation Engineers or the American Planning Association, just to have not with the idea that it's going to pay off immediately, but just have a dialogue where you recognize somebody. And I think that whole ICOR experience was basically to get you out of the office, basically, get you out, not do it by phone, not do it by Zoom, though last year, I guess the only way you could do it was by Zoom or Teams. But, that over time, you build those relationships, and maybe some won't pan out to, active work, but others may give you access or give you the introduction to somebody you may need to know. So,
and that takes a lot of time,
Yeah.
and it's time that's not exactly factored into the pie chart of what faculty are supposed, it's not exactly teaching, it's not exactly research, and it's not really service, but it has to be done at some point. And where do people find the time for that? How many relationships is too many? They can't spend all weekend doing it every week, but maybe it is just one or two relationships, maybe a nonprofit that you like, or one organization, and maybe that one is good enough to sustain you for a while, and it's good not to be overwhelmed by it.
That's good advice.
It's easy for me to say that. All of our money all comes from Washington, and they just send it. I have no idea how it gets here. It's electronic.
Yeah, no, it can't be said enough that relationships matter. I mean, just here, we all came from a very different thinking about where funding comes from and how it works. And, I've had conversations just here on our campus with different departments that's like, oh, you get funding from where? And you can do that. And so just having those conversations is helpful. And I mean, it's a bummer for, I think, a lot of us in the academic world don't necessarily like being as social, and it really is important part of the work. Like you really do have to get out there. And as much as I heard it all through grad school, it really is true that those relationships matter.
Mm-hmm.
So I think unless I don't see anything popping up, and I think this has been a great discussion. To that point, more of these discussions I think would be helpful for folks. So thank you, James, for initiating it and pulling us together.
Thanks to all of you, and if there's anything CTED can do to help connect people with stakeholders. We have a long list of stakeholders. They're mostly in DFW, but we can do what we can to help. It's a growing part of research, and we want to help you succeed. So let us know how we can help. And thanks everybody for the panel.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Carrie.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Great
This
to
was
be
great.
with you all.
Thanks.